Your Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. On today's show, I'll open things up with the latest updates we have on Matthew Schaefer's draft stock. I'll also get into a preview of tonight's matchup between the Blackhawks and the Utah Hockey Club before closing things out with an updated look at the Central Division standings as we're down to the final 25 games of the season. Quick reminder to hit the like button, jump in the comment section down below as well. I actually have another favor on today's show. I'm really starting to get close to 2,000 followers on the Locked On Blackhawks X account. If you don't already, check out at @L_O_ Blackhawks on X. Following that channel won't cost you anything, same as subscribing to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, all of which is the best way to help me grow the show and to show support over here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. All right, happy Tuesday, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. To open things up on the show here today, it's time for yet another 2025 NHL Draft update. And I've already broken down James Hagens, Michael Misa, and Porter Martone, the three most notable forward prospects in the 2025 NHL Draft class. Make sure to go and check out those episodes if you haven't done so already to get the latest updates on how each of their seasons have been going up to this point. The man I'm going to be getting into here today is widely considered to be the number one overall pick at this point in time, according to most major scouts and mock draft sites. That's, of course, defenseman Matthew Schaefer of the Erie Otters, who's unfortunately out at the moment due to injury. He actually suffered a broken clavicle, aka a broken collarbone, while representing Team Canada at the U20 World Juniors. So we haven't been able to see him as much as I think anyone would like, and I'm sure as much Matthew Schaefer would like in his draft year. And it also stinks that he missed an early portion of the season as well while recovering from mononucleosis. So a really tough draft year for Matthew Schaefer, but definitely still likely to go number one overall because when he was healthy this year, the talent and the skill set was on full display. But as far as Matthew Schaefer's makeup, he's a 6'2", 183-pound left-handed defenseman who's still only 17 years old. Super, super young for this year's draft class. And we've seen young prospects be at the top of each of the last two draft classes. Of course, Connor Bedard was 17 when he got drafted. Same with Macklin Celebrini. Celebrini even younger than Bedard was in 2023. Well, Matthew Schaefer is younger than both of them in his respected draft class. His kid isn't going to turn 18 years old until next September. So he's nearly a year younger than James Hagens, Porter Martone, two of the older forward prospects in this year's draft class. And considering that Schaefer won't even be turning 18 until the start of next year, there's, of course, a lot of runway and a lot of growth available with his makeup. As far as the numbers that he's put up so far this year, again, we've unfortunately only been able to see him in 17 games for the Erie Otters, but going back to the beginning of last year, actually, he tallied 17 points, 3 goals, and 14 assists in 56 games during his first OHL season with the Otters as a 16-year-old, really getting on the radar there, and then went on to play for Team Canada at the U18 World Juniors, where he amassed 5 points, 1 goal, and 4 assists in 7 games played. I mentioned we've only seen him in 17 games so far for Erie this season, has tallied 22 points with an impressive 7 goals as a defenseman in just 17 games, along with 15 assists. Mentioned he got injured while representing Canada at this year's U20 World Juniors, tallied 1 goal and 1 assist for 2 points in 2 games played. And a lot of people don't think it's surprising that Canada didn't last very long without Matthew Schaefer on the blue line, despite the kid only being 17 years old. So a lot to like for Matthew Schaefer. As I mentioned, a ton of runway because of his age. As far as where the major scouts and mock drafts have him ranked at this point in time, it's mostly at the top of the 2025 draft class. Elite Prospects has Schaefer ranked number 1. So does Bob McKenzie. So does Craig Button. So does McKean's Hockey. The real interesting ranking of the bunch here is Chris Peters, who's kind of been an outlier. If you've tuned into the James Hagens, Michael Misa, and Porter Martone draft updates, he's kind of been the wild card of the bunch. He has Matthew Schaefer ranked at number 7, undoubtedly the lowest of the scouts and analysts that I'm looking at here. Daily Faceoff and Sportsnet, like McKean's Hockey, Craig Button, Bob McKenzie, and Elite Prospects, also has Matthew Schaefer ranked at number 1, while Dauber Prospects, interestingly enough, has Schaefer ranked 4th. So for the most part, he's expected to go as the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft class. However, should that not be the case, there's no real place to pinpoint your finger on exactly where Matthew Schaefer is going to go. Yeah, maybe with his talent, he's likely to go number 2 next, but considering the forwards in this year's class, there's obviously going to be an intrigue depending on what specific teams need in the draft order. But make no mistake about it, even though we haven't seen Matthew Schaefer in action a ton this year, which is super unfortunate for him and all the teams like the Blackhawks at the top end of the 2025 draft class at this point in time, he's super intriguing. He's got great size, 6'2", great skating ability, plays like a true offensive-minded defenseman in the modern era, has really savvy hockey smarts and stick handling and puck control. And again, not going to turn 18 years old until next season starts in September. He has all the makings to be a number 1 defenseman in today's NHL with his aggressiveness, the way he likes to lug the mail up the rush and into the offensive zone, how much he just likes to join in on the rush in general, and his hockey IQ in the offensive zone and ability to quarterback a power play. He's probably always going to be more known for his offensive abilities, like a Quinn Hughes or a Cale Makar. Not to say Matthew Schaefer is going to be that type of player, but I think he's always going to be known for his skating and his offensive prowess. But I do think because of the size and the decent, 185-pound frame that he has for a 17-year-old kid, I do think he has the makeup to be serviceable in his own end and be able to handle his own in rugged situations and be trusted upon by his coaching staff at the next level. From what I've seen in videos as well, he uses his skating in a very savvy way on the defensive side of things, has very sharp gap control, understands where he needs to be in the defensive zone. There's just so much to like about Matthew Schaefer's game. And again, probably the thing I want to emphasize the most and why I think a lot of these scouts and analysts believe he's going to go number 1 overall is because of the upside, because of the runway, because he's only 17 years old, whereas James Hagens, Porter Martone, those kids are going to be turning 19 basically just a month after Matthew Schaefer turns 18. Because of that, I do anticipate Matthew Schaefer, even though we haven't seen him a ton so far in this year, I expect him to wind up being the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft class. But should the Chicago Blackhawks be on the clock, given how deep their defenseman prospect pool is and the need to add a high-level forward prospect alongside Connor Bedard, it is going to be very interesting should the Blackhawks wind up winning the 2025 NHL Draft Lottery. But there are my quick thoughts and a quick update on Matthew Schaefer's current season with the Erie Otters. He's been given a 3-month timeline from that broken clavicle that he suffered right before the new year at the World Juniors. Would have him back at some point around March, but considering where the Otters are in the standings and considering what Schaefer, has coming later on this summer, I do wonder if we're even going to see him back on the ice for the Otters this season. I'll be keeping you all up to date on the latest updates we get on Matthew Schaefer before the season comes to a close. But coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, all turn the corner and talk about everything you need to know before the Hawks take on the Utah Hockey Club later this evening. Real quick though, Blackhawks fans, I got to talk to you all about Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone like yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Because when it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites because Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. they make sure your post is seen by the correct candidates right now. So you can skip all of those unnecessary questions and steps, because now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. All you got to do is go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and make sure to support our show by saying you heard about Indeed through the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. Again, that's Indeed to go and get a $75 sponsored job credit. Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed, is all you need. Segment 2, the Blackhawks kick off a 3-game road trip out west with just their second matchup of the season, if you can believe it, against the Central Division rival, if you will, Utah Hockey Club, with the first, of course, coming all the way back on opening night, October 8th, which seems like years ago at this point. Blackhawks ended up falling in that game 5-2. These two teams actually are going to be playing 3 times within the next month. So you can probably expect some chippy affairs in the final 2 contests, at least at the United Center, when the calendar switches over to March. But it's been a while since we've seen this Utah Hockey Club team, as they're currently battling for a spot in the Western Conference playoff standings. I'll actually be getting into an updated look on the Central Division standings later on in today's episode. Make sure to stay tuned until that point of the show. But for Utah, they're now 4-4-2 over their past 10 games, 25-24-9 on the season. Currently has them 4 points back of the final wildcard playoff spot out west. Since returning from the Four Nations faceoff break, they fell 5-3 to the Los Angeles Kings in their opening game back on Saturday, but did bounce back nicely with a 2-1 victory over the Vancouver Canucks on Sunday night. As far as the Blackhawks lineup for this game, I'm, of course, recording this prior to the Blackhawks morning skate, even though the Hawks lost 5-2 in their last time out against the Toronto Maple Leafs. I just don't really expect many major lineup changes, and quite honestly, because of injuries and just the roster situation, they really don't have all that many changes to make at this point in time, with only 13 forwards and 7 defensemen on the active roster. But for the forward group, I would expect Landon Slaggert and Ryan Donato to remain with Connor Bedard on the top line, even though that line hasn't fully clicked. Ryan Donato obviously was playing excellent prior to the Four Nations faceoff. He's probably been the most consistent forward other than Bedard, so it does make sense to leave those two with one another for right now. I don't really have a gripe about that. Landon Slaggert, a really good opportunity up on the top line, but I will say, we got to get that top line going in these final 25 games. That is priority number 1, is to make sure Bedard is cooking. I know he and Tyler Bertuzzi went a little cold at the end of the recent stretch they played together last time, but I would really like to get Bertuzzi and maybe even Frank Nazar another crack with number 98. For the second line, I think Frank Nazar and Philip Kurashev are definitely going to stick together for another game here, after Nazar made a beautiful move to leave Max Domi in the dust after a sweet offensive rush, set up Philip Kurashev for an easy tap-in backdoor, wound up being the final goal of the game for the Blackhawks against the Leafs. I think that's good enough to keep those two once together, and I'd expect Tyler Bertuzzi, the one with some size and sandpaper on that line. I think it makes sense for him to play with Nazar and Kurashev if he's not with Bedard. Expect him to remain the right wing on the second line. Teuvo Teravainen and Nick Foligno, Ilya Mikheyev was the third line last game. Don't really see any reason to switch that up. The fourth line, though, is where things are going to be interesting. Lukas Reichel, as I mentioned on yesterday's show, did not see the ice in the third period, and I believe the second half of the second period as well. Could be looking at a healthy scratching here tonight as the Hawks opened up their road trip. Colton Dach, of course, was recalled from the Rockford Ice Hogs yesterday. Got to figure they'd like to get Dach in the lineup at least once or twice during this 3-game road trip. On the defensive side of things for the Blackhawks, Alec Martinez, Seth Jones, expect them to remain as the top pairing. Alex Vlasic and Connor Murphy as the second. Nolan Allen was in the lineup against Toronto on Sunday after Ethan Del Mastro was in against Columbus on Saturday. Rotating those guys and leaving TJ Brody in the lineup literally makes me want to rip my hair out. But because Sorensen's been going that route for the last handful of weeks, I don't know how I can come on the show and expect both EDM and Allen to be back there, despite that being what literally every Blackhawks fan is wishing for down the stretch. I'm going to expect Ethan Del Mastro gets back in there, even though Nolan Allen probably deserves more reps. Going to be interesting to see who winds up being the seventh defenseman here tonight. Arvid Soderblom, I expect to get the go just because Peter Mrazek has not been consistent whatsoever since the calendar switched over to 2025. But of course, that isn't 100% confirmed as of the time of this recording. As far as the Utah Hockey Club projected lines, what they rolled with last game when they defeated the Vancouver Canucks 2-1 on Sunday. Clayton Keller, Logan Cooley, and Nick Schmaltz as the top line. Definitely the trio you have to circle if you're the Blackhawks, and probably want Teravainen, Foligno, and Mikheyev up against them as much as possible. Easier said than done when you're on the road, though. Dylan Guenther, Barrett Hayton, Michael Carcone serving as the second line. Lawson Krause, Jared McBain, and Josh Doan as the third line, while Alexander Kerfoot, Kevin Stenlund, and Nick Bjugstad expected to round things out on the fourth line. Defensively, Mikhail Sergachev and John Marino, they're the top pairing, the do-it-all duo. Defensively for Utah, Olli Mata coming off of a performance at the Four Nations face-off for Finland. He'll be playing with Sean Dursey, and then Ian Cole and Michael Kesselring round things out on the back end. Karl Vejmelka started last time out for Utah against the Canucks. The Blackhawks are very familiar with Connor Ingram. I swear, like every time the Blackhawks are playing Utah, except for the season opener this year, Connor Ingram's the one in net. So probably expecting him to get the go here tonight. As far as players to be keeping an eye on, no real surprise for the Utah Hockey Club. Clayton Keller, Logan Cooley, Nick Schmaltz, Dylan Guenther, they're big four. The four leading scorers for them this year, all four of them have 40-plus points on the season, while Clayton Keller is currently their leading scorer with 63 points. And going back to the season opener, the only other matchup of the year against Utah, Schmaltz, Guenther, and Cooley were the ones who really did most of the damage. They all had multi-point games to help lead Utah to victory. So if the Blackhawks can focus in on that top line and at least limit them from having multi-point nights, yeah, they'll probably get their one on home ice. But if you can prevent them from going crazy, I like the Blackhawks' chances, even though they haven't been good on the road whatsoever for years now. I like their chances of picking up their first win post Four Nations break here tonight against Utah. There is everything to know before puck drops at 8 p.m. Central Time. Don't forget, Blackhawks on the West Coast. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, before I close out today's show, still want to take a quick updated look at the Central Division standings as we get down the home stretch of the season. Thank you all for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen. Here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can find Locked On NHL right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, as we get into the final 25 games of the season for the Blackhawks, at least, and most teams are down to their final 25 contests of the year, and we're coming off of the Four Nations face-off break. Of course, I thought it'd be a good time to start taking a look at some standings updates, talk about where things are at and kind of where I project them to be when the season comes to a close. Tomorrow, by the way, I will be taking a look at the Pacific Division standings before shifting things over to the Eastern Conference later on in the week. But today, I'll start with our own Central Division, which continues to be filled with great talent. It's a little bit more of a top 4, maybe top 5 in the division this year compared to some of the past years, but still remains one of the deepest divisions in all of hockey. Very well represented at the Four Nations face-off, especially in the goaltending department. I mean, Jordan Binnington winning it for Canada. You have Jake Ottinger and Connor Hellebuck for the United States. Philip Gustafsson was the starting goaltender for Sweden. All those goaltenders are in the Central Division. So tells you the competition that you got to face in this division whenever you take them on. But getting into an updated look at the standings as they've been all season long, the Winnipeg Jets remain in the top spot coming off of a 2-1 overtime win over the San Jose Sharks last night. For us Blackhawks fans, keeping an eye on the Tankathon standings would have been real nice had San Jose been able to pull that one off. But with the Jets winning last night, that moves them to 41-14-3 on the season. Crazy. 17 losses, only 14 in regulation and 59 games on the year. They have 85 points, currently at 9 points clear of Dallas, who's in second place. Fully expect Winnipeg to take the Central Division crown when it's all said and done. The Dallas Stars, though, having another really splendid season, 37-18-2 through their opening 57 games, giving them 76 points. Minnesota right behind them, 34-19-4 through 57 games with 72 points. And I'll tell you what, without Kirill Kaprizov, their leading superstar, it's been incredible that Minnesota has been able to stay at the top of the standings. Colorado right behind them in fourth. They're 33-24-2 through 59 games, good for 68 points, 4 points back of the Wild, 8 points back of the Stars for second. And fifth is the Utah Hockey Club, the team the Blackhawks will be squaring off against here tonight. As I mentioned a moment ago, 25-24-9 on the season in 58 games, giving them 59 points, has them 4 points back currently out of a wild card spot. The St. Louis Blues right there as well. They're 26-26-6 in 58 games, giving them 58 points, 1 point back of Utah, 5 points back of the final wild card spot. And then we have the lowly Nashville Predators and the Chicago Blackhawks. The Preds, 29-7 through 56 games with 47 points, 6 points ahead of our Blackhawks, who are now 17-33-7 and only have 41 points, 3 higher than the San Jose Sharks, who are dead last in the standings. As far as how I kind of expect things to shake out when it's all said and done in the Central Division, like I said, Winnipeg, I think they've separated themselves and given themselves a pretty good margin. They're going to come away with the Central Division this year. I expect the Dallas Stars to finish second once again. I do think the Colorado Avalanche, even though they've been very weird this year, and obviously the Mikko Rantanen trade caused some weird vibes, I do think they're going to wind up being third in this division. I think Minnesota is going to wind up in the fourth spot, but they are still going to qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs. The interesting one I really think is this Utah Hockey Club team, because while on paper, I think a lot of people would rule them out, especially because they don't have a ton of playoff experience. Sometimes like a young team that doesn't know any better is the most dangerous. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this Utah Hockey Club team go on a run. My projection is either they're going to be the last team in or they're going to be the first team out west. They're just going to have good energy. And I think they're going to have good motivation down the stretch to give this a good run. But yeah, the Central Division shaping up to be interesting once again. Maybe the St. Louis Blues are able to ride Jordan Binnington's performance from the Four Nations face-off into the Stanley Cup playoffs. I don't really expect that with just the amount of teams ahead of them, but we'll see if St. Louis can sneak in like I think the Utah Hockey Club has a chance to. But there are the latest updates on the Central Division standings with 25 games left in the season. Tomorrow, I'll be taking a look at the Pacific Division standings, but that's going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can check me out on X at Jack Bushman too, but make sure to follow my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, everyone, have a great rest of your Tuesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.